The EU Chapter 5 Season 2 FNCS Grand Finals are almost here, and soon we'll see who really is the best in the region. But what exactly are the strategies each top team are using to possibly take home the win? Let's first start with the reigning FNCS champions Malabuka and Mustache over at Grim Gate. Now, if you've been following this season, you'll know that this is by far the most broken drop in the game, and over on NA, Peterbot and Poyo have been running the region, just recently winning every single game in the Duo Cash Cup. But on EU, it's not looking so good for them. And that's because they've been heavily contested. Throughout this season, we have seen many other top tier pros land at Grim Gate, and even though Malabuka and Mustache are two of the scariest fighters out there, more often than not, there's at least two other teams, which makes the chances of them actually winning much lower. Now, most of the time when they do actually get their hands on it, they perform extremely well like you'd think. But with that being said, they rarely ever lived off spawn, let alone actually get the medallion. Looking at their games, it seems like they either both die in the first few minutes, or just one of them goes down, leading to the other having to run away in order to reboot them, which obviously results in them being shambles. On top of this, they only managed to qualify for 2 Cash Cup finals this season, and in them only placed 15th and 36th. On top of that, out of the 12 total final games they played, Malabuka and Mustache only got the coin 3 times. However, with that all being said, it seems like they might actually end up being uncontested. Throughout the entirety of FNCS, they've been contested every single time. However, it seems like they were actually the only team who was landing there that made it out of the qualifiers and got into Grands. With that being said though, they may be contested by one other duo, who actually hasn't really been landing at Grim this season. Also, this duo doesn't really have many achievements in the game, so I think it's pretty safe to say that Mustache and Malabuka will wipe them out. Now, this definitely won't last the entire tournament, and on day 2, there will for sure be teams landing there. So it could be on that day where we see things fall apart. And it would be mainly due to a team I haven't mentioned yet, who is really the reason for them dying so often. Whenever they're contested, the spawn fight at Grim tends to last so long that teams can easily third party, and the main team that does this is Tripper and Fredoxy, who land at this split just to the south of them. This duo is super underrated, and despite not making Grands last season, they actually have a chance to come out of nowhere and win this time around. Like I just mentioned, Grim fights can be very drawn out, so this gives Tripper and Fredoxy the perfect amount of time to completely loot their drop, then come and sneak up on Grim. And so far, it looks like this strategy has been working very well after they placed 4th in the most recent Cash Cup. Since they have such a large area uncontested, before going into Grim, Tripper is able to claim this bunker for later on. After this, Fredoxy looks for an opening tag in order to push in. Now, they obviously don't get it every time, but even when they do, they follow the same game plan. Pretty much every game, you'll find the duo who has the Cerberus medallion on height, but this team rarely even looks up for it. Instead, they opt to play low ground, only really using the coin for mid-game. However, this is also the reason for them not being as consistent, since low ground gets very hectic. It also seems like they really struggle to turn those top 10s into top 3s. That being said though, they did end up making Grands by winning game 4 of the upper bracket on day 1, so maybe they'll be able to fix those mistakes. But regardless, you should definitely keep an eye out for them and maybe add them to your predictions. Let's now make our way to the very south of the map to take a look at the Polish goats Kami and Seti, who always seem to have some tricks up their sleeves. But first, you should double check your subscribe because only 7% of you watching actually are. Last season, despite having the same drop uncontested, they ended up underperforming, ending in 33rd. This season though, things seem to be going much better, so far placing 3rd, 5th, and 13th in the Cash Cups. Also playing very consistent in FNCS, even qualifying to the Grands by winning the very first game of semifinals. This duo is always very interesting to look at, since they do stuff no other pros do. This one is very simple, but literally every game they destroy the pad to the split next to them. They do this so 1, they can make sure they don't get padded on, and 2, that they can stay ahead of this team. But that's not it. Since their drop doesn't have the most ammo, one of them always takes the water bending, since it's infinite and it's also quite easy to hit shots with. More teams have started doing this now, but they were by far the first top tier team to actually start using them. Let's talk about their endgame now. Kami and Seti used to be known as the Kings of Low Ground, but now it seems like they've turned into the Kings of Height. They always end up positioning themselves in the best spot of the zone in order to crank up and take height right before first moving, then afterwards do an extremely good job of maintaining height, despite not having any medallions. And don't get me wrong, whenever they don't play height, they still perform well. It's just the fact that nowadays they seem to always go for it. And let's not forget, even though they were pretty quiet last season, they're still one of the best duos to ever touch this game. Now, Kami and Seti have been around for years, but let's talk about a duo who just recently started making a name for themselves, Marius and Sane Guild. Last season, they went crazy and ended up placing 4th in FNCS. And so far this season, they've already won 2 Cash Cups and placed 3rd in another. They've been dropping Underworld this season, and for the most part, they've had the entire POI uncontested, meaning they get the Siphon Medallion for free. But interestingly enough, the way they play afterwards is just very simple. Looking at their games, they've really mastered all the fundamentals, and having extremely efficient rotations, positioning themselves in the best spot possible thanks to Sane Guild. Marius, on the other hand, is really good at finding refreshes to keep them pushing. I'm sure you've all seen how insanely good he is at fighting, almost dropping a 40 bomb in the Solo Victory Cup. But as of now, it looks like they're being contested by at least 2 other teams. But with that being said, last season they did get contested on day 2 and still managed to do well, so who knows how this will play out. But the main thing to note from them is just how consistent their playstyle is, and it's consistency that wins tournaments, so I wouldn't be shocked if they did just that. The same, however, can't be said for the next duo, Vidil and Raison. So far, they have been looking really good this season, recently placing 2nd in the last duo Cash Cup, but this season they've been landing at Brawler's Battleground, contesting a very good fighting team, Swizzy and Vandiak. But interestingly enough, after both these teams qualified early on in the semifinals, Raison and Vidil decided to actually leave, instead opting to contest this split. I'm not really sure if this is a good decision, going from contesting a decent drop to a much worse drop, but I'm not a pro, so maybe it'll work out. Swizzy, on the other hand, now being uncontested, could definitely do well. However, the main concern about their drop is the lack of players in this area to get enough Storm Surge damage. Nevertheless, this duo is one to look out for if they actually get uncontested. But it's Fortnite at the end of the day, so who knows what will happen. Next, we need to talk about the most underrated duo who I think will win FNCS, despite one of them never making a grand finals before, and that's Chap and Teeny. Teeny has been around for a bit longer, making 3 grands, coming 3rd in one of them, but like I just said, Chap has never made one in his life. However, they're still looking super strong, even though they only formed halfway into the season, getting 2 seconds and a 6th in the Cash Cups. If you guys have been following Mongrel and Savage, they land at the exact same split, and it's especially good when uncontested, which it looks like they'll actually be. This duo is really special because they are very good at pretty much everything they do. Whether that's playing low ground, height, or just fighting in general, they make it all look super easy. And talking about fighting, they were able to drop a 35 kill win in the lower bracket semifinals, which is really insane when you think about it, and looking at this leaderboard, they won by a huge margin. But there's one major factor, which is the reason for them being so consistent. Because they can loot their drop extremely quickly, they are always the first to claim one of 2 forecast towers right next to them. And I don't need to explain to you how broken knowing every single game where the next zone will be. So if you guys haven't been paying attention to this team, you really should, because if they do get uncontested, we could see them run away with it, which would also make Teeny the first ever controller player to win an FNCS on EU. Next, we have another team looking for their first FNCS win, but what makes them different is the fact that they have tons of experience, placing 5th last season, and that's Pink and Vico. Now, throughout this season, they actually haven't performed very well in Cash Cups, with their best by far being a 7th. With that being said, though, they did end up winning both weeks of the FNCS qualifiers, so that definitely counts for something. This season at last, they've been dropping at this split, and it's a really good one, especially because of the fact that they have a forecast tower right there that has a 56% spawn rate. On top of that, there's a bunker spawn pretty close, which they always push even if a team is already there. Now this duo is very similar to others we've covered, being extraordinarily good at everything they do. More often than not, they play mid and low ground during endgame. However, they are no strangers to height, and when on top, they typically stay there. So with that being said, they are definitely another contender to win. Speaking of duos with experience, you got Vino and Tayson. So far, their placements haven't been too notable, but this is one of those teams where they start off mediocre and then turn things up into grands. They really need no introduction for how they play since they've been on top for years. And this season is looking like another good one with them splitting their drop at Fencing Fields. Looking at last season, they ended up getting unconned Grand Glacier and was only able to get a 15th. But a big reason for this was because Surge is really hard to get from there. So with this new drop spot switch, it will be much easier to actually get those tags they need, all while still getting good loot. Now you might be wondering about some of EU's other top teams like Queasy and Thomas. Well, to put it bluntly, I don't see them doing very well this season. This duo has been really struggling this season, and considering the fact that they literally got second place last season, just barely losing by 1 point, they shouldn't be doing this poorly. They ended up having to make their way in the grands from the lower bracket because they didn't make a finals in one of the qualifier weeks. They've also bounced around from Lavish to Mount Olympus a bunch this season, which is a pretty big indicator for why they've been underperforming. Another two teams who also fall into a similar boat are Janice and Flixie and Chicho and Trulex. All these players are top competitors who could very well win, and have done so before. But unfortunately, it looks like they're all going to be contested, so we may see a top 10 or possible top 5, however, that win isn't looking too promising. I tried to cover all the top teams playing and what their strategies are going into the grand finals. But if there's a team I haven't mentioned yet that you think will win, please comment down below. While you're at it, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and I hope you all have an amazing rest of your days. Peace out.